In today's podcast, Dr. John Hall and myself sit down with Dr. Joel Gregory, who holds the George W. Truett Endowed Chair of Preaching and Evangelism at Baylor University's George W. Truett's Theological Seminary and is director of Truett Seminary's Kyle Lake Center for Effective Preaching. We've had Dr. Joel Gregory this past week as a revival preacher, and he has been doing a great job, and we are so ecstatic to have him sit down with us and talk about preaching in this podcast. We hope you enjoy, and as always, we ask that you like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to the Upon Further Review podcast, the podcast that takes a deeper look into topics seen throughout Scripture. As your host, Cody Kitchen, sits down with Dr. John Hall and a special guest to discuss what Scripture says and how we are to apply it to our lives.
Welcome to Upon Further Review. I'm your host, Cody Kitchen, and joined with me is the one, the only, Dr. John Hall.
Goodness.
And also with us, a special guest
Yes.
is Dr. Joel Gregory, who needs no introduction.
Not in the preaching world, that's for sure.
No, we're so glad that you were able to join us today.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here, Cody,
Yes.
Dr. Hall. I'm happy that
Yes, and we're going to be
share this
talking
time.
about, I'm sure you don't have to know what we're talking about, we're going to be talking about preaching. One of the best to do it, in my opinion.
Yep.
A great preacher, and appreciate that he's been here this week with the revival. Has some great messages and really spoken to my heart. So I appreciate it.
It's my privilege. Thank
Yes. Do you want to say anything before we get started?
Well, it's been such a joy to have Dr. Gregory with us this week. He's been leading in our spring revival and put on a master class in preaching, how to preach a biblical sermon. So thank you for being here with us.
Well, it's been an honor to be here. I've enjoyed the fellowship and the warmth, the spirit of the church, and hospitality of your staff very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the first question we have is, you have recently retired from the academic world as a professor of preaching at George W. Truett Theological Seminary, which is embedded within the Baylor University. And so what are some trends that you've identified in the world of homiletics as your time as a professor?
Well, thank you for that question. This is an interesting time in homiletics, which is a fancy way of saying the study of the art and craft of biblical preaching. Across these 20 years, I remember when I began teaching in 2005.
Wow.
One thing, there was a great deal of emphasis on postmodernity. Everyone's talking about this as the postmodern world. And then that slipped over into the post-postmodern world and so forth. It's interesting now. It seems like all of that discussion nearly has gone away. We were also talking about the emerging church, whatever that was, and that's pretty well gone away. I think the major thing I've detected in talking about preaching is the shortening of attention span. If I look over the last 20 years, and that is people's capacity to focus on a passage while you explain it. When you look at the preaching task, there you up, say if you're in the book of Nehemiah, here's this Jewish dude that rebuilt a wall 2,400 years ago. All you have to say in today's culture is, in the Persian Empire 2,400 years ago, and about half the people just slid off the pew. And I understand that. It's not in that world. Microsoft did a study of how long people spend on screens, and they said average 9 seconds flipping through social media. When you have that short attention span, expository preaching a text and explaining it, I think is a big challenge. And that's one of the things I've noticed in recent years in the world of homiletics, is just how do you fight to get it heard. When I started preaching, I was worried about how do I get it said. I like to say that's moved from my mouth to the listener's ear. How can I get distracted people in a multi-generational setting to hear what's being said?
Yeah, that's really good.
That's really interesting to hear. What do you think are the books that every preacher needs to read?
Right. Well, if you're talking about, let's talk about two different things. One is your exegetical work. I hope that every preacher will spend, my goal is teaching is 12 hours a week in writing a biblical sermon. And when I look at that, and you ask about books, first of all, I call it Monday work.
Right.
A couple of hours of reading your text. If you have the original language, it's certainly there. If not, or along with that, in translation. So I want every preacher to have a shelf, or if it's Logos Labronics, to be able to tile up multiple translations, both by committees, because they're kind of warranted and validated, and individuals. Like this last year was the anniversary of Helen Barrett Montgomery's New Testament. Tremendous individual translation from the Greek. I want you to have those. And then, in terms of exegetical works, I hope every preacher has a full set of what I'd call heavyweight exegetical commentaries. These are the magisterial sets, like Word, or Erdman's New International Critical Commentary, the emerging Baker exegetical, which is a tremendous set, kind of parallel to that, the Zondervan exegetical. I hope you have a full set of heavyweight analytical commentaries. And then along with those, something I call midweight, and that is they're standing 100 feet above the text and they're looking at it as a synopsis, whereas those heavy tools go word by word. And that's what I suggest. Now, when it comes to preaching text, what should you read? You mentioned one the other day that's been formative from the 80s, J.R.W. Stott's Between Two Worlds, and certainly that's an icon. If you look at the most influential text in the evangelical world, Haddon Robinson, Biblical Preaching, now in the 4th edition that just came out. Brian Chappell, the Presbyterian preacher and educator, his book is a real manual, how to do it. If you read that book, it reminds me of a friend of mine who read Ben Hogan's Steps to Golf. He read the book, he read it, and he didn't go from one to the other till he'd mastered the previous grip and everything. And he won the club championship reading that book. Chappell's book is like that. If you absorb that book and do it, you're going to improve as a preacher. Now, those are two significant books that have been textbooks all over the country. Now, there's some other kinds of contributions. Tim Keller's book on preaching, the late Tim Keller, is as much a philosophy of preaching as it is how to do it. And I think, even though we're not in that world, some of the mainliners have written very good books about preaching. Thomas Long, The Witness of Preaching, or Fred Craddock's 3 books. Preaching is his 3rd one. He was a 3-book guy, 3 big books. That's a good one. Those are books that, to be acquainted with preaching in this time, are certainly worthy. I like to let books sit a while. Say, talking about commentaries. R.C.H. Lenski, the Lutheran commentator, wrote 13 volumes on the New Testament at Concordia nearly 100 years ago. Those are incredible helps to preachers. He was a Lutheran, a conservative Lutheran homiletician and exegete. And I always tell preachers this: just because it's the last thing off the press does not mean that it's necessarily the best.
Right.
The church lets things sit and soak, and that's a good thing for you to weigh. How long has this been said by the church, generally, to be useful?
Yeah, that's great stuff there.
That is really good.
Yes.
And helpful, and hopefully helpful to people watching. And you've kind of already hit at this a little bit, but what is a typical week for you? And maybe even how has it changed from when you were preaching every day to now kind of what is a typical week of sermon preparation?
Well, I'm glad you'd asked that. That's one thing I talk about in my Proclaimer's Place seminars. I do a 4-day seminar in continuing education and preaching. We've done 133 of them in 27 states over the last 20 years. And one of the first things we talk about is what is an ideal week. And in visiting with myself and other preachers in the pastoral ministry, I look at 12 hours of preparation as producing a competent biblical sermon. And I like to divide that 2 hours a day, Monday through Saturday, knowing that no No week in the pastorate is perfect. Right. But you need to have a plan to plan preaching, so when you wake up Monday, you know what you're going to do, and you can get at it. So 2 hours on Monday in what I call a relaxed reading of the text. You've preached on Sunday. You've got to get over that. The late Gardner Taylor, the famous black preacher, told the New York Times when he retired, he said, "What did you do all those years?" And he said, "Well, I preached. I got over preaching. I prepared, and I preached again." And the New York Times was asked, "What do you mean get over preaching?" And he said, "Well, it takes something out of you." So Monday, you don't want to dive in the deep end of the pool, but you do want to get started. I've found in my own preaching, the earlier by the day of the week I started, the better I did in terms of being ready. There's something literally about sleeping on it. 7/8 of human consciousness is below the conscious level. You make connections with the text by sleeping on it. So 2 hours reading the text, taking notes, asking questions. There's a lot of preacher books tell you what questions. Tuesday and Wednesday, the exegetical commentators. I'm a believer in preachers reading deep and wide in exegesis, and that is slow. It's ruminating. It's chewing the cud. It's not fast. And for the preacher, 4 or 5 such commentaries are sufficient. You'll have 3 to 5 times more than you can ever use if you do that, of good stuff. F.B. Meyer, the great British expositor, said the art of exposition is the art of elimination. And if you study, it is. It's what you leave out, not what you bring in. You have to leave out some good stuff. 2 days of exegetical reading, that's 6 hours before you write a sermon. Then Thursday and Friday, composition. I like to talk about speaking it out before you write it out. Preaching is an oral discipline. Say it and then write it. Write it, and in writing it, look for the just right word rather than the almost right word. Right. But 2 days, and now you may get at it. If you read Haddon Robinson, you're going to discover the big idea of the passage. You're going to look for enriching it with illustrative material. Now, that's 10 hours through Friday, Thursday and Friday. Saturday, internalizing it. You've written it. I don't like to say memorize, but internalize. Read it again, put the paper down, think through it. That's 12 hours. And I do believe preachers can be competent, and I like that word, competent, or in business you'd say best practices to get ready to preach. All of this, of course, threaded through with prayer and devotion. I'm not saying anything about that side of it. This is a prayerful, devotional exercise. Obviously, that's just a priori. But I'm talking about the actual act of preparation. That's 12 hours. Now, you're not always going to hit bottom of the 9th World Series, 7th game, out of the park. I tell preachers, don't even try that. Try to be competent. Most Sundays you're going to get on first base, hit a solid single. That's okay. Clyde E. Fant used to say, try to preach helpful sermons, and some of them will be great. And I agree with that. Try to preach helpful sermons, and every now and then you'll have a great sermon. If you try to aim at preaching some great sermon every Sunday, it probably won't be great or helpful.
That's good.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said about the breakdown of a week. I know for me personally, I have certain touchstones I have to hit every day of my work week.
Right.
And then I really appreciate what you're saying about the internalizing and getting a head start on my Mondays are almost as critical to me as my Thursday is for the sermon.
There you go.
But the touchstones that you're hitting on, really helpful.
Well, I'm glad, too. And also, what if, in the pastorate, Doctor, things get blown away. You wake up Monday and you got to go to the hospital, an emergency, or Tuesday. I've had everything happen. I remember when the boiler blew up once in 1970. Well, that didn't get studied that day. But the thing about a plan, and Dr. Taylor says this, it's better to fail with a plan than succeed without one because you know where to go back to.
Right.
And in this system of 2 hours a day, you can pick up wherever you are, do the best you can.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's really good.
Good way to look at it. Well, again, this is just my opinion, but I think you're one of the most effective effective preachers that we have today. And so, in your opinion, what are some essential keys and habits of effective preaching?
Well, number one, you can't say that. And let me preface this with saying, any ability to preach is a sheer gift. You can refine the gift, and you should refine the gift. I don't look at able preaching as any kind of personal achievement. Preaching is a gift. Now, it's up to you to refine it. It's kind of like, well, put it this way, humans can't make crude oil. It's got to be there. And then you can refine it into kerosene or gasoline or whatever you want to do with it. Well, preaching's that way. It's a basic gift. And then you spend a lifetime refining that gift. And I look at it that way. I've been preaching since I was 16. It's been a challenging 30 years. No.
Yes, sir.
I've been through eras and times of preaching. Preaching must not be an end in itself. As much as I love the art and craft of preaching, the end of preaching is not just an aesthetic product in the pulpit. The end of preaching is proclaiming the transforming grace, regeneration, new birth through the Lord Jesus Christ, or saking the saints and having it go further in and deeper down. In terms of essentials, I try to emphasize, and in homiletics class, we don't get to deal with spiritual formation every day, but preaching must be built on an authentic, continuous, and one would hope righteous and virtuous life of devotion and obedience. You don't have to be a genius to imitate preaching. I mean, an average person of average intelligence can imitate sounding like a preaching. I mean, the sad thing is it can just be as synthetic as it can be, acting like preaching. For preaching to have any power or authenticity, it needs to come out of a life of genuine, conscious devotion to the Lord. Not a perfect life by any means, but a life of genuineness in terms of your own walk with the Lord. I remember the famous words of Billy Graham. When they asked him at the end of his life, they asked him what he'd do different. Something like, well, I would have preached less and prayed and read more. And I think many of us would feel that way. I think to keep working on it, not fall in love with what you've done, or be satisfied. It's like Paul. He said, I do not count myself to have attained. And I think you can write that over the wall in every preacher's study. Stay at refreshment. I tell my students, if you will fall in love with biblical exegesis, I'm not really very concerned about your preaching. So much of it rests in exegetical study. You go all the way back to the first great Protestant exegete, Calvin, and you can believe Calvin is a great exegete and not be a, quote, Calvinist.
Right.
He, to this day, his volumes demonstrate careful word-by-word analysis of the text. When he got up in Geneva, that's what he did.
Yeah.
And I just feel like the root of all exposition is exegetical reading. I don't know if that gets at what you were asking, but those some thoughts about it.
No, that's great. And what would you say, out of the many years of your preaching, what is the strength of what would you say is your strength in preaching?
Yeah. Well, I think two things, and once again, this is not self-aggrandizement.
Sure.
To stand outside and look at it, it might be just as much what other people said as what I said. First of all, exegetical preparation, time in the text, time with reverent, godly exegetes. Absolutely. And the second thing, particularly more and more in the latter half of my ministry, trying to find detailed, credible, interesting, illustrative material. Now, if I could invent the church I wanted to preach to, it'd just be Bible, Bible, Bible. Look at this word. Look at the next word. Isn't it exciting to find the pluperfect passive tense here? But that doesn't, it can't get hurt.
Right.
So I've had to bring in more, I hope not gratuitous illustrations, that is telling a story just to tell a story, but organic illustrations that shed light on the subject, and those in as detailed a way as possible to make them credible. So I would say a couple of things. That if my preaching has worked in my own self-assessment, exegetical preparation, and detailed organic illustration that sheds light on the exposition.
Wow. I told John this, and I thought yesterday was one of the best sermons I've heard in a long time. And the reason I'm saying that is I really appreciated the way that you brought in the text with the applications, applying it. But even more than that, the way that you transitioned from the text to connecting it to Christ and bringing forth the gospel it was everything that I've learned in class, and now being seen in the way that you did that. And so for me, I really appreciated the way that you brought that out yesterday.
Well, I'm glad it was helpful.
Yes.
That text is a good workshop for doing that sort of thing, because you're dealing with a 4,000-year-old character.
Right.
How do you get him and land him in Cleburne in 2025? And that really is in the backdrop of all preaching that works. The text was given over there then in the world it was. You can't get around that. Yeah. The Bible's probably written over a period, maybe 1,500 years from, say, start 1500 BC through Revelation. That's an old book. Yeah. I mean, it's in a world so different from ours, it's staggering. Now we've got to get it out of then into now, out of there into here, out of was into is. And that, to me, is always the paradigm of preaching. Don't get too heavy on either end. If all you do is pulpit exegesis, you may be excited about it. But Bubba or Leroy or Mary Jane out here are not in that world, and I have sympathy with that. Those of us who preach are prayed to have the time and leisure. We're paid to have the time and leisure to do what we do. But you have to remember, somebody sitting out there working 2 jobs, barely holding life together, doesn't have the opportunity to stand on a mountaintop and look at what we get to see. And we really are bringing them back a word from another world and getting it into their world, which is the privilege of preaching. And I've got one thing's changed in my preaching too, is more empathy for the pew. Having been through a lot of what I've gone through in my own life's ups and downs, I've learned to have far more empathy with people who just show up and they're there. And, they're fighting, many of them working multiple jobs, sandwich generation people, between parents and children, all kinds of things. Wow. They're fighting battles.
Yeah, that's very good counsel.
Yeah. Really good. Appreciate that. One of the last questions is, what suggestions would you offer to preachers specifically to improve their preaching?
Well, as hard as it is, they likely at some point are going to have to listen to themselves or watch themselves, and that's terrifically hard. Yeah. Let me say that. I don't want to be hypocritical about it. When I was preaching on the Acts Network on national television, or for years on the Baptist Hour on 500 stations, I don't know that I watched or listened to myself more than once. It was just cringingly difficult.
Yeah.
That may be the case. I think to be deliberate in the analysis of what you've done, and that doesn't mean at 1 o'clock on Sunday. You need to let some space come about before that post-sermon critique, but to sit back and to ask yourself about a number of things. First of all, did the text lead this sermon? Was I really preaching this text? Did the illustrative material connect with multiple generations? Here's what I mean. If I quote Frank Sinatra now, who'd I connect with? Grandmother. I left everybody who likes rap out, but I quote a rapper. I left out grandma. Am I speaking in a way that connects with illustration? And am I calling people to some kind of specific action that will either change or reinforce their attitude or behavior? That's Dr. Al Faisal's definition of application. What changes or reinforces attitude or behavior specifically? And that's one of the hardest things for me in developing it. And application isn't just ratcheting your voice up to 100 decibels and screaming at people, go do it. You really have to show them how. Sometimes we preachers want to punt and say, may the Holy Spirit apply this in your life. Well, that's like handing the football on the 50-yard line, saying, here, you get it the rest of the way in. I like to hand it to them at least on the 10 or the 20. Give them some help with getting to application. So I look back over messages and ask, how are these elements functioning? And inevitably, one of them's too light. One of them was inept. And I like to tell preachers this, all of us absolutely bomb out sometimes. I preached in the last year times that I wish the earth would open under the pulpit and swallow me, just so I didn't have to see anybody when it was over. That happens, and you can't live there, shake it off. There's another Sunday coming. You really can't live with that. Shake it off. Get over it. The kingdom of God's not going to fall off the earth because your sermon didn't work. There's always the next one, and if you're going to be with longevity in the church, I'm sure you'd agree that.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got to, you've got to shake it off and go on.
Yeah, that's a challenge sometimes because I am my worst critic, and so if I perceive that my Sunday morning message fell flat, it's a painful week ahead of me. But by Monday I got to get over it because the next Sunday is bearing down on me already. So
it's out there. I like to compare Sundays like a long, flat, straight road in West Texas where you can see the telephone poles all the way to the horizon.
Exactly.
Y'all know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And the faster your car goes, the faster those poles come at you. That's the way Sundays are. Can I just give you all one little story about getting over it that helped me? Brother Drayton McLean, great benefactor at Baylor, gave our football team. He was a Baptist deacon and a layman, devout man. He was talking to a group of preachers one time basically about get over it, and he said when he bought the Houston Astros, in one of their early games, they lost, right at the end of the game. Well, they went down to the locker room, and they were all playing around, messing around, popping towels and one another and so forth. He called them together. He wasn't happy with them being happy. They'd blown a game, and he let them have it. And then Drayton McLean said, one of the veterans came to him and said, Mr. McLean, respectfully, he said, this is a 150-game season. He said, if we get down over losing this game, we'll probably lose the next 3 or 4 for you. He said, we got to get over this. And I remember when Drayton said that very much I apply to preaching. There's a lot of Sundays out there, you bomb out. You did it, the church does. They know, they know, everybody knows.
Right.
That's when the Baptist people say there's a good spirit here today. Warm spirit. Just get over it. Yeah. Forget those things that are behind. That's great advice.
That is great.
Not just for living, but also for preaching.
Sure.
That's really good.
Very good.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add? Or?
Oh, no, I couldn't add anything on that. I second just about all of these said, for sure.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you for letting me say a word about it.
Yeah, well,
thank you for doing
here
so.
with you.
What a blessing it's been to me, and I know I could probably speak for John, and I know and hope that as this podcast goes out, not only for preachers and pastors, but even the lay people knowing what it takes and what goes through Monday through Friday and Monday through Saturday, I guess, really, and really appreciate your wisdom in preaching, and thank you for taking some time.
It's an honor to be here, and I'm honored you'd ask me some things about it. I sometimes joke, say, an expert is somebody who's about 30 miles from where they live.
Right.
You sound like an expert when you're the visitor, but thank you very much for this opportunity and for the time with this wonderful church. Real Street's a warm, embracing, dear fellowship, and I've enjoyed the week greatly.
Well, thank
It's
you.
been our pleasure, for
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for watching this podcast. And as always, like, subscribe, and share. And remember, make Christ known by what you say and how you live. Y'all have a great week. friend. Y'all have a great week.